how did you guys read this? Because it's blurring it. Thank you, technology. But I have the epic version of this, and it has the Jack Kirby stuff and some Dennis Cowan stuff. So
I read it in multiple different formats. I have single copies through 5. I read it digitally for a couple I didn't have physically. And then I bought a trade for my son a while back that was on sale at a comic shop. So the second half I have as a trade, which is kind of nice.
I started picking up the Masterworks hardcovers, in the 90s when they started coming out. And I've gotten where I'm afraid to touch comic books anymore. So I picked up the hardcovers because my kids were, 3-5 years old. And I thought this will be a nice way to share comics with them. And so that was my reading avenue of choice.
Yeah.
Black Panther, I actually started with my kids when they were little. And, that first story has the magical frog, and my little, 5-year-old goes, I don't know about this one, Dad. So we ended up putting it down.
I mean, how do you guys feel about the magical frog? Like my favorite Black Panther stuff is, this and the Don McGregor stuff, which funny enough, it came before. That series ended in 1976. It was Rich Buckler, Billy Graham, one of my favorite artists, and Don McGregor. And that book is all about warlords and Black Panther fighting the Klan and, political intrigue and all of this. And then you go to this book and it's like time traveling and alien men and monsters, and it's very sci-fi.
Not to mention the big shift in art style.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was weird to me because I read it when it came out the first time, and I thought the frog was weird. The whole thing was weird to me because again, like we talked about with the Eternals, my impression of Kirby was always with Stan Lee up to that point, reading it in reprints. And then when I saw this, I thought, wow, this is a great chance for me to jump on at the beginning of a Jack Kirby book. I want to be there. Everything he put out, #1, everything he put out, period, I bought it as a Marvel book. That's what I was reading at the time. And I just thought it was so bizarre because it was not what I expected. And I think for a lot of people, like you were saying, Shaw, the Don McGregor book, that whole series, that whole run, it's not what it was a big shift for people.
Yeah.
So I like it now, but then it seemed out of place in the Marvel universe.
Christopher, had you been reading the previous Black Panther incarnation jumping into this?
I did read some of it. Yeah, I picked up comics seriously like around 75. So some of the end of Jungle Action I did pick up and really liked it. So this to me was kind of jarring.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the exact same thought I had because it's so grounded. And then you have, that said, like in terms of aesthetics, some of my favorite lettering and title lettering comes from Jack Kirby's 1970s work, like issues 1 through 4. Again, I'm gonna change my settings. If you guys can converse, I'll come back to
Sure.
you.
That page you're showing of the lettering, one of the things that I really like about that opening page is rather than the Panther jumping at you or coming at you, he's being blasted back.
This font right here, and it changes over time. It becomes something that's a bit less appealing to me, but this kind of, I don't know, I just call it Panther font. It's really bombastic. Like, I guess this was Mike Royer, right?
Yeah.
So this would be him lettering these titles. It's just, there's so much personality to it. And the fact that you go to Machine Man, it's a completely different font. You go to the Eternals, it's something different. I don't know. I just love the 70s stuff.
I'm curious if you guys know how Jack got onto this book. Like if he was saying, oh man, I want to bring back the Black Panther. I've got ideas for my own stories. Or if they were like, oh, Black Panther's popular off this Jungle Action run. We want to bring its new book. Jack, we just canceled your last project. I'm just curious how it came about, because when I read that first story in particular, I pictured Jack saying, yeah, I could do Black Panther, I've got an idea for a story, and it wasn't an idea of a Black Panther story. It's just an idea for a story he had in the back of his head. And he's like, and then I'll just make it happen with Black Panther. You know, it just feels like, as we talked about before, he's just creating all these ideas, and he's like, yeah, this will work well enough, you know. And you know, often you think of, oh, first issue, it's got to be this, you know, special story that kind of introduces new readers to the character, and maybe it's going to take the character on this arc. And this one, it's just like, I've got an idea, I'll have this frog. that was my feeling, wondering like, would a different story have been a better first issue story? When he got into, you know, him returning to Wakanda, that felt more like it would have been a good first issue story to me.
I guess to, you know, go to Chris's question, I was wondering if Christopher knows why, because like I have a guess, but since you were reading at the time, I feel like you would probably have a better window.
Well, I can tell you what Jack was thinking, because one of the things he would always do with a new series is the first letter page would be his thoughts about why he's doing a book. So that's one of the reasons why I have this book, so I could find that out. And he said the primary reason of having Black Panther, what was the purpose of that character, is to entertain, as far as he was concerned. The other thing he said was, this is going to be a ticket to the Universe Express, so it's going to be exploring. And of course, you know, Jack with his cosmic stuff, he has to work that in there. And he wanted to explore the origin of the Panther cult. So that was a big part of the storyline, which we see later on. But the other thing he said was that he really liked the character, and that's why he was doing it. I don't know what Marvel's input was with that, but this is what he wanted to do. This was like his favorite Marvel of Marvel characters that he didn't create. This is his favorite.
Mm-hmm. I mean, there's that interview he does in Foom where it's announcing his return to Marvel. You know, he left DC and he's coming back, and they announced pretty much, you know, every book he was doing. Machine Man, Eternals wasn't called the Eternals then, he just called it My Secret Gods book. So that was one where, like, if you're reading at that time, you're like, what is Jack doing about this Gods book? And yeah, Captain America and Black Panther were the other big ones. So with those two, it felt like he was coming back to characters that he had, you know, created or co-created or worked on before, and coming back and kind of being like, if I'm going to come back, I want to do something new, but also something that's familiar to me.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because I mean, he worked on Cap because he had a hand in that. And now this saying it was his favorite. Interestingly enough, he did not work on Fantastic Four. He just did not want to, other than doing some covers, he didn't want to touch that.
Coming off the Eternals, it was interesting to see how he used this frog to show glimpses of the past and how the history of our universe as we know it is all stories interconnected by whatever mythology he's created here. I see that theme popping up whatever we're reading.
That's right. Yeah, because he was saying that when they look at the origin of mankind, we have Alibaba, we have the Loch Ness Monster, all of that, bringing these creatures into that period from those two frogs, that time traveling machine. That was pretty cool how he worked that in there.
It's a storyline that even people like, you know, Alan Moore and stuff do, where they try to explain everything into one big story. And it'd be interesting to see in literature where that may have popped up earliest. It's very postmodern, right? To say, I'm going to take all this previous stuff and see how I can fit it into my box. But from a literary standpoint, I wonder if many people were doing that before. I was thinking about how, you know, reading these Black Panthers was Steven Spielberg reading this, you know, or George Lucas, because there's a lot of Indiana Jones in sort of those first issues adventuring and, you know, things like that. But Black Panther came earlier, right? And similarly with the Eternals, you know, that first issue, they're kind of mining for history in an archaeological way.
Yeah, I wish that we could have seen more of what was in King Solomon's tomb, because like some of the
Oh yeah.
panels were kind of small, and I was like, oh, this is where I really wanted to see what Jack would do with that. When they first got to the tomb, it was like one panel. I was like, that's it. I really wanted to see more.
It's like King Solomon's storage locker a little
Yeah.
bit. I guess my favorite part of all of this, and you guys were saying like this, this book kind of feels like it could fit in the Eternals, but also something like the Demon, where it goes back and looks at the supernatural uh, impact through history, and like he dives into the culture of witches and the Demon. But him going over to like Eastern mythology and talking about like Alibaba and bringing out like the jinn or the genie was crazy to me, because where is he finding this in the 70s again, like you know in like Ditko's Doctor Strange, there are influences from like Persian poetry, and you're wondering where are they getting this stuff at that time, where are they finding translations. So to see a guy from the Lower East Side pulling from these Eastern influences is it's kind of astounding for a comic book.
Yeah, yeah. It's look, reading his stuff now, I have a much, like I said before about Eternals, a much greater appreciation for it, because I'm reading it as Jack Kirby's Black Panther. I'm not reading it as a Marvel comic per se. I'm not looking at it through the lens of how is this fitting in with the rest of the Marvel universe. It really doesn't matter. Read as a whole, from beginning to end, just as Jack's work, I really enjoyed this way more than I did when I read it as a kid. And you can just see so much of his inventiveness. There are jetpacks in I think the first issue, where rather than your typical jetpack where it's just on your back and the exhaust is straight down, which would give you some nasty burns, he actually had it curved away from the body. And you figure he probably looked at like at a hot rod or something and said, I can make a jetpack out of that, because he's always like reinventing stuff he sees in the environment. And I thought that was a pretty clever way to make a jetpack.
Yeah, and I want to pull out the
Yeah.
jetpack panel for the people who are watching to see it. And it's just like there are stories where the government would track down Jack Kirby and be like, are you making like are you designing equipment for the government or something? And he's like, no, I just draw comics, man. Like yeah, and I like when they introduce Xanda, who's this princess. I don't know if she showed up after that, but I don't know if she's Wakandan or how him and T'Challa, her and T'Challa know each other.
I think she was in like a neighboring country. And because remember at one point she was threatening Wakanda with a missile to get the Black Panther to go on that mission to find the ancient samurai city. And
Samurai City.
Samurai City, yeah.
Yeah, I mean the whole thing about that is because you meet this whole group of billionaires. They're all rich people, and their whole goal is to find the Fountain of Youth, which resides in the Samurai City. And we don't have to go in order because we're jumping around a little bit, but that just reminds me a little bit of like Jeff Bezos taking off for space and leaving everyone behind. Like you can replace every single one of those billionaires with like Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk, and it would be the exact same story. Like there's this decrepit old guy, like they got Roger Ailes and his heart still won't give out. And yeah, I kind of like that Jack takes a few hits. I feel like at some points he takes hits at collectors, because he's like, you have these blinders on and all you care about is like the next thing, and then he's attacking rich people. It's like all you care about is living forever and exploiting other people. But on the other hand, he's like, oh yeah, there's a Samurai City underground that you go into from the mountains, and it has the Fountain of Youth. So it's like commentary, but also just Jack doing whatever he wants.
And he threw in a Yeti too.
Yeah, I mean the Yeti. I was looking through the Jungle Action stuff, and there is this Yeti place in the mountains where, I love that. I'm getting long-winded about this, but like Billy Graham draws Black Panther in a way where over the course of the story, his like suit gets damaged and everything, and by that Yeti point in Jungle Action, he's like on his last leg. So I don't know if Jack just wanted to do a Yeti in the mountains, or if he had looked through those other stories, or if it's the same location. But yeah, there's a Yeti issue. And to go back to the thing that Christopher mentioned, where if this were just an Avengers book or a continuity book, they would have put in like Manape or something. It would have been like a pre-established character. But Jack's like, no, we're gonna do Yeti, then we're gonna go fight some samurai. It'll be all good.
Well, he had been doing the giant monsters in the late 50s, early 60s, and I saw that Yeti and I thought, oh, he's going back to those roots, because it really just felt like his giant monster stories. You know, his art evolved by then, and Dick Ayers wasn't inking it, so it had a little different look. But you look at that skeleton under the monster, so to speak, and it feels the same to me. And that kind of relates to what you were saying about where does Jack get this stuff. As an artist who is looking for material, and who had been doing so before the internet, you know, you go to bookstores and you say, oh, here's a book on UFOs, and here's a book on you know, the Abominable Snowman, and here's a book on witchcraft, and you build up a library for yourself. And I know I've read about a lot of those artists from the 60s and 70s who had file cabinets full of images they snipped from magazines. And you know, clearly Jack's tastes are on the sort of fringe side of things. And so I can just picture him, you know, having a room full of books and magazines and newspaper clippings to go to.
You mentioned that, and I immediately thought of Wallace Wood's Swipe File. You know, he has all these planes, and it's like, if you just copy it from something, you don't have to come up with an idea. Don't do the Jack Kirby thing, just copy it.
One thing I want to point out about Jack's artwork that I really like and always have liked, you know how it's very powerful. He shows motion. Well, one thing, it's not motion, but it's the eyes. The eyes are so expressive in his artwork. And, you know, sometimes with the Black Panther, you would just see like wide eyes or something like that. But in this case, you see the eyes behind the mask. He really impressed me with an issue that he filled in. It was Tales of Suspense, and it was the Submariner fighting Iron Man, and Jack filled in for Gene Colan. And there's a panel, and this is again with the use of the eyes behind the mask, where the Submariner, he grabs Iron Man's mask, and he's like, he's going to rip off my mask. He's going to just tear the whole thing off. And Iron Man's eyes are like wide. You can see the man behind the mask, not just this armor, but you can actually see the person inside in panic. And with this, like the first issue of the Black Panther, you can just see the focal point is the frog on the page. You know, I mean, it's the panther reaching for it. And you can just see his eyes wide, and the person behind him, his eyes are wide. And I'll hold it up. Makes sense, since this is going to be visual. There we go. There we go. I know it's a little shiny. Sorry about that. And it's just, he's just so good at that. I think in modern terms, you know, Dean Haspel, who does that too with, you know, he did with the fox and the Red Hook, showing that expression behind the mask. And I think that's really important. And in this series, I think, at least for me, I think this was the first time I saw the explanation as to why the Black Panther even bothers to wear a mask, because he's donning his ritualistic mask, the Panther cult mask, because that's when he's in battle, he puts on the mask. Except for one time he forgot to, when he was fighting a samurai, he didn't put on the mask in the series. For some reason, that was the only time. But otherwise, there's a reason for it. It's not just, I'm just wearing a mask for the heck of it. You know, like, why bother? But for him, it's a very important part of the Panther cult, and he has to wear that mask when he's going into battle.
Yeah. You were mentioning, you know, wearing the mask. He doesn't even take off the mask in the first issue. Like,
yeah, right.
There's a panel where Xanda tries to take off his mask, and he's like, no, don't. Like that, you know, that goes with that explanation you were saying, where it's like, no, it's a ritualistic outfit. He's not just wearing this for personal enjoyment or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, if it were me, it'd be like, don't take off the mask. I didn't brush my teeth today. I haven't shaved. Just leave it on.
Notice that panel of Xanda's eyes right next to that.
Yeah.
Periodically, you know, every few pages, he does these close-ups on the eyes. they're always, when Royer inks them, they're always perfect circles. You know, you can tell he did it with the guide. When you look at some of the older comics with Ayers inking it or whatever, you can see, oh, sometimes they're hand drawn. And the newer ones that Royer did, it's interesting because they're so perfectly round. They are really piercing. They read differently.
Yeah, and they're never not effective. Like those close-ups are some of my favorite things about those 1970s Kirby comics. T'Challa's family, and this is jumping ahead. You know, you meet some of his cousins and extended family, I guess, and you know, I have no problem with the Black Musketeers, but the fact that they all have a Black Panther costume bugs me to no end. Where it's like, there's only one Black Panther. You know, there's just one position open and it's been filled. You don't need like 7 other people to show up and be like, I'm Black Panther 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You know.
Yeah, I thought that was a bit odd when I read that as a kid. Although the main message there was they were part of the Panther clan. They had to step in to help out, and they worked as a team. Each person did what they did best to defeat the threat, or at least to put it down for the time. One thing also in this series too is we do find out there's a flashback where the Black Panther remembers how he actually won the mantle of Black Panther, which was kind of neat.
Issue number 8. I didn't mean to cut you off. I was just...
No, please. Yes. And he has that makeshift mask that he has on, because otherwise he might not have won because they would have known who he was that was going for the title.
Yeah.
I read that and kind of went, yeah, I guess I could buy that.
the origin story?
The idea of, oh, I have to be masked because otherwise you would have said, oh, it's him. I can't. Psychologically, I don't know that I could give it my all fighting against him.
Yeah.
And it reminded me of sort of Stan Lee logic sometimes. Like, you know, in the first appearance of the Black Panther, the Black Panther's fighting the entire Fantastic Four team. And so then after they're like, well, wait a minute, you're a good guy like us. So why did you fight us? And he's like, because I had to prove to myself that I was good enough. And it's like, yeah, I guess I buy that. And I kind of felt the same with this. Like, yeah, I guess so.
Did we just discover that Black Panther might have an inferiority complex? Like, he's already kind of invincible, so that might be his kryptonite, where he's just like, I'm not good enough.
Well, because he's rich, right?
Yeah.
And so he's like Bruce Wayne, where it's like, people don't just like me for my money, do they? I've got to, I got to prove to myself there's more to it than that.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like if he didn't wear the mask, it would be kind of like a nepotism thing, because he is fighting against, it's not his father, I think it's his uncle or something. So if he just rolled up and he's like, just give me the uniform, it's fine, I'll take care of it. You know, again, it has to be that he has to prove himself. I do like this panel right here, though. Oh, I didn't mean to cut you off again.
Yeah, that was a great sequence.
Yeah.
That whole battle, I thought was a lot of fun. Working your way up, you know, proving yourself. I wanted to get back to the Black Panther family that kind of feels like the Shazam family or the Superman family. And in this case, I loved that they were all different body shapes and types. That was fun. And that I thought it was kind of a joke. It was almost like Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen, you know, that Mary, I forget what their names were, but they're based off the comic crew that were like puppy dogs with Jack Kirby. So he put them in Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen. You know, it was just this brigade of helpers. And you brought up, Shaw, how it irked you, but not for these reasons of being the cornball sidekicks, but for an actual story reason. And I think that's great. I know that I think it was Jack Kirby who said that he never liked the idea of the the kid sidekick, because why would some, you know, macho adult who's going out, you know, beating up bad guys, why would he say, yeah, come on, kid, maybe you can help out? You know, it seems more likely that there would be, you know, equals, or, you know, not just some kid. And so him kind of creating this kind of kid sidekick brigade is kind of an odd mix, but the way he made it fit in the story, as you described, Christopher, I thought that's kind of fun. the family that needs to help out, and the way they're going to do it is don these crazy costumes so that they can be a part of it. I got a kick out of it, but realism has never been an issue for me as a bone to pick. If it's cornball and crazy, that's not where a story loses me.
Well, you can always expect that with Jack's work, because you know, even Mr. Little, Abner Little versus Little Abner. Every time he swore an oath, you know, take a drink, because they were kind of crazy. It kind of reminded me of Perry White's exclamations, you know, Great Caesar's ghost. He had his own little cosmic oaths he'd make throughout the series. He was kind of a cool character.
The collectors generally, I thought, were fun. How, like, she was really evil, she was murdering people, but then they would show touches of her where it's like, oh, she's human too, and oh, isn't this interesting? And you start to be intrigued by her and interested in her. And Abner, you know, he's acting like the sidekick and the good guy, but then you wonder about his motives, and there was sort of a gray, not what do we expect with these characters? Where are they going to go? The other ones were more cartoon character, you know, evil, greedy, but the two that were on the adventure with him, you started to get some depth in them, and that was fun. And it reminded me in Eternals of, you know, introducing the bad guys, and then realizing, no, maybe they're not bad guys so much, they're just part of the grand picture, and they're a necessary part, and they have their lives too, and their loves. And it's maybe the big thing that I really appreciated with these Kirby readings we're doing, that I didn't realize the depth of what he was often creating.
Yeah, I mean, initially, like in the beginning, Mr. Little, he wants to put the frogs back. They want to get the 6 million year man back. But then when it comes to the sacred water skin, he wants to get some of that water. I mean, he wants to bring it back. In fact, the Black Panther, you know, he returns it to the leader of the samurai. And he's like, what are you doing? He's like, I'm giving it back. And he's like, you know, good for you, because you're giving back what I can take back. So, yeah. But the Black Panther, he shows his honor. And that's a big part of this, is, you know, the warrior code, the honor, family is a big part of this too. Even with all some of the screwball stuff that happens in the comic, that's a central theme. That's very important that Jack carries throughout the book.
And that was another great sequence, I thought, too, Christopher, that samurai and honor sequence.
Yeah, and there's a panel right here, another semi close-up, where he's talking about the people of Wakanda are people of honor, like the samurai. Yeah, the Samurai City is by far my favorite section of this series, because you can tell that Jack was starting to watch samurai cinema during this time in the 70s. I don't know, you guys have probably seen it, but there's that 1976 film called Red Sun by Terrence Young, where it's Charles Bronson, who plays a gunslinger, and Toshiro Mifune, who plays a samurai, clearly. And there's a line that he takes from that movie directly, where, you know, they fight the samurai. You know, there's a Yeti fight and a samurai fight all in one issue. But you know, it ends where they introduce the samurai, and then there's a samurai fight in the next issue. But Black Panther ends up beating the samurai, I think, by just punching him instead of, you know, like, he doesn't fight fair. So even though it's not a fair fight, the samurai's like, I'm going to commit harakiri, which is in Bushido and the samurai warrior code, it's just a way to honor. It's a way of honor. If you failed, you have lost your honor, so you have to kill yourself. And little Abner, or Mr. Abner, or I just call him like Danny DeVito, but he has a line that's like ripped straight. If you watch the movie, there's a line straight from this where he's talking about harakiri, and I'll put it up right here for the people who can see it. And this is how you know that Jack is watching samurai movies at the time. Maybe he just he watched Red Sun or like Seven Samurai or Yojimbo, and he's like, okay, let me put a few of these guys in here, and then we can go on to something else. But the line is, his only solution is harakiri, what we call suicide. And in Red Sun, it's harakiri, what you call suicide.
I really appreciated that section of the series because I spent some time in the martial arts, and I know that that sword is, you don't touch someone's sword. If a black belt has a bow staff in the dojo, you don't pick it up and put it away. That is theirs. You can't touch it. It's disrespectful. And for a warrior to lose his sword, that's, that is a big disgrace. So that meant something to me. That was very accurate. I really like that section of it. One thing that struck me when I read this, as I was, okay, this is an ancient society. They've stayed young using the sacred water, and they've been keeping tabs on our society. So they have all this technology. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And then I thought, no, wait a minute, hold on. Wakanda, they've been a secret society and they have all the technology. It makes perfect sense. So he convinced me. Yeah, that makes sense.
After I finished this Black Panther run of Kirby's, as we talked about it got me thinking about what was the context that these came out. And I actually went back and reread the first Fantastic Four appearances.
Mm-hmm.
And then he popped up in Tales of Suspense for a few issues of Captain America, which ended with the famous Captain America 100, the first issue of Captain America. And at the end of that issue, Cap says, what do you say? There's a hole in the Avengers lineup. Why don't you join? And he says, I think I just might. And then I read, I think it was around issue 52, something like that. He joined the Avengers. And so the first two arcs were Kirby and Lee, and then popping into the Avengers was Roy Thomas. And because I was just kind of curious, how did this all come to be? And it was interesting to see, Stan Lee handled it one way, and then Roy Thomas started to handle it another way. And of course, the jungle actions were completely different, as we talked about. And then Kirby handling it completely different, as we've talked about. And it's kind of interesting to clearly Stan Lee liked this character, and thought it was important. And in the liner notes for the Avengers, Roy Thomas was talking about how Stan, he was real adamant about, I don't want the big characters in the Avengers. They can pop in occasionally as guest stars to bump up the ratings as needed. But for the most part, Stan said, we're keeping this with these B-rank characters, but he wanted Black Panther in there because he considered him a good B character that needed more, visibility. And so clearly they were trying to, get this guy more screen time.
Mm-hmm.
And then from the Avengers, I think was into Jungle Action, right, where he got his own book but just not his own title. And so it's interesting to see that development from, why not have an African American character? Well, hey, he's a good character, so what else can we do with him? And clearly the Captain America storyline was just an excuse to find a way to get him into the team, so they had to take a few months to get him there, and that was the purpose of that. And I brought it up because you're talking about Wakanda. I got a little off track, I guess, but this idea of, this African tribe that that to all appearances is still doing their headdresses and robes and necklaces made of bones and spears, but oh, coincidentally, they're also the richest nation in the world, and under the ground they have these crazy Steranko style computer rooms.
Mhm.
And yeah, it is a little, it's like, well, if this, why this? And I feel the same way about the samurais. It's like, well, if you have all this, like in the Fantastic Four issues, Black Panther bought the Invisible Girl the most expensive dresses from Paris. And I thought, so you have access to all this stuff, but you're still going around shirtless in your little robes. And it makes you ask some questions.
It does. If they're staying, if their culture is staying basically the same, but there's all these influences from outside that they're bringing in, yet that's not really changing the culture. That's one thing I kind of struggle with, that you would think there would be some impact on the samurai society having all this technology, yet trying to stay with the old ways. You think they'd want to reject that and just stay with the older ways, the simpler ways?
In real life, you wouldn't have it both ways like this.
Yeah.
You would listen to rap, or you would wear the baggy pants, or something would translate. You would wear nice expensive shoes.
Yeah, right. Right.
Because you're running around barefoot. Yeah, and so it's an interesting idea to stay attached to your roots, but in real life application, things would come out in interesting ways.
For sure.
Your hairstyle, something. Yeah.
And you would think that the younger generation, I mean, when I used to live on the East Coast, there was Amish country, and you could see some of the younger Amish kids when I would go to the farmers market. You'd see some of the modern technology starting to creep in. They're getting a little, loose with following the exact dictates of the society. So it's kind of hard to, well, of course, and they're not being isolationists either. I mean, they are out in public going to the market, whereas I guess the Wakandans would not be doing that. They're going to be behind their wall with the society, not going to be going out, at least at this stage of the story. So, but you do see, at least with the younger generations, they start to adopt more of that technology and start to, push away the old ways. And that's what I think would really happen.
Definitely.
The Amish is a great example of maybe the group of people who has most clearly stuck with their traditions and kept out modern technologies.
Oh yeah, I mean, we would go to Dutch Wonderland and be riding behind a buggy. You kind of waiting for the horse and buggy to pass. Or they'd be out there on their bikes, and they had these bikes that didn't have pedals. They would just be almost like a scooter, and they would use those to go travel to short distances. But they were sticking to the old ways. Boy, there's a tangent. The Amish.
If there's one thing I want to make sure we discuss today, it's the Amish while discussing Black Panther.
It worked though, surprisingly. Sometimes you riff, you don't know what's going to happen, but sometimes it works. You were mentioning how he was in Fantastic Four and Captain America and the Avengers in his own book, and I noticed that almost every single solo Black Panther story is just him coming home. And then it's coming home from leaving, doing whatever he's been doing in these other books. And the whole plot is him trying to get back and fix whatever problem popped up when he left. Like that was Jungle Action, with Killmonger. It's this book where, there's a warlord who gets turned into like some kind of beast, it's
some 50s Atlas giant monster.
Yeah.
The throwback is coming. I like, that's the whole plot. It's kind of Abner who drives everything, where it's T'Challa's like, okay, I'm gonna drop you off, and then I'm gonna go back to Wakanda. There's even a point later on in the book where it's a subplot. I forget who these characters are, but I think they're just like hitmen or murderers or something. And they end up crashing, but Black Panther still doesn't just leave them. He's like, I'm going to take you somewhere safe, and then I'm going to go back home finally, like 13 issues in. But it still goes in with the whole idea of honor, where they tried to kill him on this helicopter, but he still won't. He's I guess taking the higher ground. He's better than them in a way.
Yeah, I mean, and Black Panther regrets being away from Wakanda. He has to get back. And I thought, wow, this is a lot like the Submariner, who's away from Atlantis, and things are going to hell in Atlantis, and now I shouldn't have left. I have to come back and be the king. And this, if you read all the Submariner stuff, there is a series called the Saga of the Submariner. It kind of covers all of it that Roy Thomas did. You will see it's like back and forth, back and forth. And I kind of see a parallel with the king of Atlantis and the king of Wakanda. You've been away from your countries. Your people need you. You have to get back. You can't be out on these adventures. Of course, we wanted to be out on adventures, and I wonder if that not is also the audience, people writing in saying, hey, we want to see him get back to Wakanda. What is this? So there might have been a push in that direction too.
Yeah, and I appreciate all of these Submariner references because he's one of my favorite characters. But to compare the two, not that it's necessary, but I found that his arc is a little bit more interesting compared to Black Panther's because he's not full Atlantean. Namor McKenzie is the child of an Irish, I think in Irish, Aquaman and Submariner have like the same origin, like a lighthouse guardian and then like an Atlantean queen or something. But he's half. So the fact that he was always an outsider to begin with, he's not accepted on the surface world, and he's not accepted there. Like even when he goes back, every issue is like some Atlantean warlord like Atuma rolling up and being like, I have the right claim because I'm blue-blooded or whatever. But Black Panther deals with it every now and then, but I appreciate the whole outsider perspective where it's someone who's trying to fit in some way. There's also politics involved where it is Namor's birthright, but at the same time, the people don't always view him as someone they want to support. Black Panther's the same way. Like the story has an arc where a warlord shows up to take over because T'Challa's not there and he has no respect for the Black Panther title. So
something else I want to point out when I was reading the series is when he's trying to get this mafia boss to safety after the plane crashes. And he's crawling through the desert. And I love the look of the Panther with, the dehydration and everything. And then he runs into this robot. And I'm like, oh, man, where's this going? And it turns out to be a movie set.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking of, I wonder if this was around the time when he was working on that fake sci-fi film for Argo. Remember, you've seen the movie?
Yeah,
maybe?
that crossed my mind too.
I was like, I wonder if there's some connection there.
Yeah, those pages where it's like they are Jack Kirby pages, but they might not be actual Jack Kirby pages. Like I've heard both stories, but one of my favorite quotes with Kirby just using film influences is he talks about how he's not competing with other comic book artists or other people in the medium. He's competing with the film camera, which I think is just so great. But also it's like a little bit of Jack ego coming in. Then again, you appreciate it though, because it's true. Like he's trying to compete with, he was always looking forward. It was never just what am I looking at in my own time? It's how is this going to stay relevant decades from now?
The way you presented that just now, I see that your interpretation is, I'm not just a comics artist, I create work as great as the camera, and there might be an element of that, and maybe not from boasting, but just in terms of what you aspire to create.
Right.
What's interesting to me is when you first said that quote, the way I took it was, comics, they were the biggest medium of them all in the 40s, right? Selling billions of copies or whatever. And ever since, their numbers have gotten lower and lower and lower. And that's continued since Kirby's moved on, where it's an issue of technology being replaced.
Mhm.
And the way you said the quote made me think, oh, was he already concerned when he said this in the 70s or 80s or whatever, that the comics medium is working its way towards the obsolete, that maybe his comment wasn't about bragging so much as about how do I keep this interesting to kids who just want to see things moving and hear actual sounds, instead of having to read, where, you know, maybe it's not a boast as it's just a concern. How do I keep this alive except by making it the best medium I can.
Yeah,
Well, he did want to get into different formats too, and maybe more like graphic novels versus just the monthly floppy.
Yeah, that seemed to be like a consistent trend through his career. Like he started off with strips, and then he's like, okay, you put a bunch of those strips together and you make a comic book. And then, you know, it would have been great to see like a Kirby graphic novel at some point if he got to that.
And he was in animation
Yeah.
for a while.
Mhm.
Although I don't know that he had much control with that, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't necessarily his stories. I believe he created the Thundar characters, like he designed them. Is that right? Or did Wally Wood design them and he fleshed them out? Or there's something like that. But you can look online at Thundar the Barbarian and you can see some concept sketches by Kirby.
You know, we're really lucky that we can read these as a collection, you know, like in the omnibuy and such. Because I'm thinking it must have been really tough back then. And it was probably really tough for this book to get a footing because people were comparing Jack to what he used to do, like I did as a kid. And he was doing so much at Marvel that this book was coming out bi-monthly. Like monthly's hard enough as it is these days. These were coming out bi-monthly. And they were, over the course of the series, I think like 2 price increases, which, you know, from 30 cents to 35, I think to at the very end, it was 40 cents, I believe. I mean, for a kid, and I'd always be like, okay, that's it. One more price increase and I'm dropping them. And I kept saying that for like 3-4 years, but it had to be really hard for him with people waiting that long for the next issue. Cause I can just, okay, I want to read the next one, but 2 months, what happened?
Yeah, how do you keep track of a storyline like this that's continuing for all these issues? And you bring up a really interesting point too, that there was no such thing as collections. If you missed issue 6 because your mom didn't take you to the grocery store that week, you just never get to find out what happens unless a friend happened to pick it up or whatever. Yeah, so it was a very different way of experiencing stories than we have now. And the writers that did these stories that continued over months and months, they were taking a big chance from a marketing standpoint, because if a kid picks up one and goes, what's going on? They're not going to pick up the issue after that, and then that's the end of the series potentially. So we talked with Eternals about audience, and you know, issues like that you got to really consider, and it helps explain why a lot of these things Jack did got canceled within 8 or 12 issues.
Yep, I agree.
And Christopher mentioned something where, you know, in the 70s, Jack is working on all of this stuff. He's not working with a writer. He's writing and doing the art for the stuff himself. And we covered this last time with the Eternals, but in the 70s, his books have the page count drops. And I've been trying to look into this, and I haven't really found any reliable sources on it. But part of me wonders if they were just cutting the pages down to cancel the books at some point, or if Jack was just doing too much to where they're cutting down the pages to make it more manageable. You know, there are issues that are like 18 pages instead of like 21 or 22. So
that's interesting, because I didn't notice that, but I did notice that initially the books had a double page spread in the beginning, page 2 and 3, but then after a while that went away. I thought, oh wow, Jack's tightening up the pacing here, he's got a lot to fit in. But I wonder if that, I didn't go back and count, but I wonder if some of that was page count.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I heard, like, if you look there's about a 3-4 month period in Marvel Comics in the 70s, And I remember seeing them in some Shang-Chi comics. I remember seeing them in some Werewolf by Night comics, where every page 2 was a 2-page spread. And if you look at some of these 2-page spreads, the lines are actually thicker. And my theory is Marvel was saying we got to save some money because they're paying per page, right?
Mhm.
So if you have a 20-page comic, that means you can do 1 page a day every weekday of the month, right? Because you have four weeks per month, 5 days. So that gives you 20 pages. So Marvel can pay 1 page a day for each weekday of the month. My theory is these 2-page spreads, they say, okay, we want to save money. We're going to pay you for 19 pages a month now, but you only have to do 19 pages, so you work less. But that 19th page, draw sideways, and then we're going to blow it up into 2 pages.
Mm.
So now we still get 20 pages, but we're paying you for 19 pages. And if you go and look at these, I think you'll see what I mean. And I actually, I emailed, I can't remember who, but I was asking about them, and they just said, sounds familiar, but they didn't confirm or deny it. But this is my theory. And you look at Jack's stuff, and you don't get the impression he's like, well, I'm still going to draw 2 pages because my fans deserve that, you know? So if it was a thing, I don't see it happening with his page, but it was something I wondered about when I started seeing it popping up in all these issues from about the same time period.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely something like I feel like you guys would have more input to that, because like the 70s stuff for Kirby, you know, I have gaps in my like Bronze Age knowledge. Like, you know, being into Taekwondo as a kid, I was into Iron Fist and not so much like Shang-Chi. I didn't even know Shang-Chi existed until I was like well into high school. But like you can totally see in his 70s work, like as it goes on, and we talked about this in the Eternals, a lot of the later issues of each of those runs kind of like rushes to end. You know, Christopher was mentioning, you're both were mentioning how, you know, double page spreads kind of go away. By the end, there's only 1 splash page, no double page spread. And again, I want to know, like, how far in advance did they let him know that this book was canceled? Because the arc doesn't even end. The last issue he does on Black Panther, it's like the exciting conclusion is coming up, and then in the corner in small text with a new creative team, and you're like, well, I don't care anymore if Jack's not doing it.
Did either of you guys read? I read the next issue and a half just to see how it would be handled.
Yeah.
Because I was kind of intrigued by that. And I thought it was really interesting because the story very much continued, but now it was Jim Shooter and Ed Hannigan writing and Jerry Bingham drawing. And it was a completely different story, but it totally, like, it just felt like so bizarrely different. Like, you know, just the dialogue. Kirby's dialogue is so, you know, specifically kind of wacky, and it was completely more realistic dialogue, completely more realistic artwork, and but the story just continued exactly, you know, from where it left off right into the new thing. And it just goes to show you whoever is directing the choir or whatever, you know, makes a huge difference in these cases, even though the story just continued along. So I was kind of curious, did Jack say, well, I was going to do this, so take it from there? Or did he just say, I'm out of here? And they said, well, how do we finish this up? And what about this?
I wondered
the kind of questions. Yeah.
I wondered the same thing, because at this point, it was at this time I checked Jack's chronology of his work, and he finished up Machine Man and Eternals. Well, he already finished up Eternals. It was Machine Man and one other book. So he was basically out of there. And Jim had just taken over as editor in chief. So I wonder how much input Jack had with Jim, like saying, this is where I was going to go. And then Jim plotted it, and then Ed Hannigan scripted it. So I wonder if there was that. That's something I'll have to ask Shooter if I ever see him again. Is that, was there a discussion, or was he just out of there saying, I'm not happy doing this. They're cutting back on too much of my work. I'm done. Because this is practically right at the very end for him.
And was this when he went into animation then?
I think he did some animation, and then a couple of years later, it was Pacific Comics doing his own stuff again.
And that was yeah, and then he works with Mike Royer on the early issues of Captain Victory. It's issue 1 for sure. I don't know if it's issue 2, and then I think most of Silver Stars with Royer. I don't know how close behind his 70s Marvel work number 1 of Captain Victory was produced, because it looks kind of like that time period, the work from that period. But then later on they bring in Mike Thibodeau, who has like a completely different, he has like a thinner inking style compared to Royer. And you were bringing up no splash, double page splashes. Guess what they do in the issue after Kirby leaves?
Oh man.
Here it is. There we go. Double page splash.
Oh boy.
I gotta say though, if you're gonna use a double page splash, they really did it for that one there.
Yeah.
I know we're not talking about Kirby when I say this, but that one was super effective in my opinion.
Yeah, and the later issues do refer back to the other. I haven't really read it, but like going by the art, they do refer back to the Kirby stuff. And the thing that, I guess, not the problem, but the biggest difference is that when Kirby leaves, they start introducing Marvel characters into the book. So it's no longer just Black Panther's story. Now it's just, okay, continuity, which I don't know.
It's probably also sales. If
Yeah.
the book was only bi-monthly and their big writer artist just left the book, they got to come up with a way to keep people buying it.
Yeah, slap Iron Man or Captain America onto the cover and people are going to come buy it. But yeah, just to go back to the Kirby stuff, because we're talking about the stuff afterwards. I guess we can wrap up with the Kirby Black Panther. I don't know if we'll ever find out if what Shooter wrote in that other issue is what Jack intended, because Jack isn't, if you notice, he puts a lot of his trauma into his work. World War II, he came out with a lot of PTSD. I am very confident in the fact that maybe Jack was doing all of these pages as a way to cope. Maybe that was his therapy. And I'm not saying that in, a way to slight him or to make light of his situation, but even with all of that trauma, he isn't the type of person to do like gruesome violence. Like, you see people getting shot off panel, but maybe like a helmet pops up in the air. That's to signify, oh, this guy's dead. To have this guy in the other issue, like, this is Kyber. This is like the villain Black Panther's been chasing. Look like this. I don't think this is something Jack would do.
I agree. No, he would not.
When you held that up the first time, I was thinking, I wonder if Jack had designed, if he had, he ends the issue with what does he see? What does Kyber look like? And I was just thinking to myself, what would we have seen if Jack had drawn that as a 2-page spread?
Yeah.
And I'm picturing kind of a gloppy, gelatinous 1950s Atlas monster,
Yeah, that's far more likely. That other take on it is not what I would have expected Jack to do.
I mean, I'm all for body horror though, but just like to see, Jack Kirby body horror would have been just something completely different. It's like finding out like Santa Claus doesn't exist or something. It's just like, huh?
What?
Wait, who doesn't exist?
Spoilers.
Talking about Jack's history, he grew up in a tough neighborhood.
Yeah.
You get the feeling he was beat up all the time. He was short and tiny. so he had to be scrappy to survive. So you picture him in fistfights all the time. You hear of him as an adult fist fighting anyone that is a Nazi sympathizer or anti-Semitic. You know that this guy, you know, he spoke with his fists, and he wasn't afraid to do it. And when I was reading Black Panther, there are a fair amount of pretty great fist fight scenes and battle type scenes. But as you were saying, Shaw, it feels like a children's comic to read these fist fights. And, you know, as a kid, I remember reading comics and thinking, oh, these are fun, and that's so cool how they're fighting each other. But I never got the sense of, you know, how awful it is getting punched in the face or getting punched in the gut from comics. And it wasn't until later as an adult when art kind of started changing and they started kind of showing violence in a more violent, disturbing way that I realized, you know, violence isn't cool, you know, and when you're in high school and you see a school fight and the kids just being so raw and awful and the blood and, you know, fighting, it's very different in comics than in life, and in, you know, more modern comics often kind of capture that a little better.
I mean, for a few reasons, a real life fight doesn't last as long as like what you see in comics and movies. Like people go down kind of quickly.
And there's not witty banter back and forth usually.
No, yeah. But you also, like, Jack does this thing where it's accessible for kids, but like reading it now, you have to realize that like there are stories that deal with like people getting kidnapped or trafficked, and it talks about war camps. But it's also in a way where if you're like 5 years old, you're not paying attention to just that. Where this last arc is a guy kidnapping people against their will, trapping them in a small room, and experimenting on them.
Disintegrating them, basically.
Yeah. It's a fine line that you just don't see anymore. It's either like too boring for kids and not mature enough for adults, or it's just straight up just like everyone's heads are exploding and people are getting punched through the gut, and you know I
find this so interesting though, that, you know, if you talk with a lot of current day comic creators or even, you know, movie makers or whatever, I don't know that they've experienced violence in the way Kirby did through his whole life. And yet Kirby created these stories with these themes in mind and in the stories, but you don't feel them is I guess what I'm trying to get at. And that kind of struck me as really interesting, that he's creating this comic book violence as someone who experienced true violence.
Yeah.
As opposed to people that are glorifying and making a spectacle of violence, who maybe never experienced it the way he did.
Yeah, exactly. Like he writes T'Challa, like he kind of writes him as a guy from the Lower East Side. Like T'Challa is kind of a tough guy in this, because normally you would see him as like this dignified, you know, you said it perfectly. Like Jack doesn't have to prove that he was out there, you know, fist fighting like 5 guys, as you talk about in interviews. You know, if you do it, he kind of has that like samurai zen where it's like he just knows he can do it. He doesn't need to talk about it. And then like Joe Schmo writing Spider-Man over here being like, I can fight 20 guys at one time. Like that guy's not, you know, he's not about it. So
it's a generational thing too, because Jack and others that served in World War II, they just didn't really talk about that. And they saw some horrible things that we now are aware of, see some of the films and hear the stories about this. But, you know, he just wanted some escapism with these comics. He just wanted fun. He wanted to experiment. He wanted to go places that he couldn't really go. He wanted to explore the cosmos and the human psyche through comics. You know, the warrior's code, honor, and all these other things. And it was just fun. He enjoyed doing it. He enjoyed this character, Black Panther, most of all. And he wanted to make an adventure that people would enjoy. So even though he dealt with real horror in life, he just he didn't go there with his books. He could have very easily had done that, just reflected what he had seen. But he wanted this to be fun and to have some escapism. That was just also part of his generation. He just didn't talk about it. He did his job. He's done. He moves on.